Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on our latest product update and what's new in UAC 7.6. My name is Caroline Geckler from Stonebranch, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few small things. So this event is designed to be interactive between you and the speaker. So if you have a question, please let us know. Click on the Q&A tab in your dashboard, and you can submit your question, and we'll answer it at the end of the session. In the event that we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you right after the event. Additionally, in the right-hand corner of your screen, you'll find some handouts that are related to the session. Please feel free to take a look. And then lastly, closed captions are available for this session. So you can turn those on and we have them available for you in multiple languages that you might be watching along in. So with all that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Colin Cocksedge, who's our Director of Product Management here at Stonebranch. Colin, take it away.
So yeah, the first thing we'll take care of here is important release information. With certain releases, there are just things we want people to be aware of if you're considering an upgrade. Then we'll look at the high level. Now, there's a lot more things in the release that we have than we're able to cover in a release webinar like this. So, again, we'll point those out and highlight those, but we do want you to look at the release notes, maintenance lists, in order to validate what's changed, what's new before you install the product. We'll take a look at a demo of the product with a few of the features, and also talk a little bit about what's coming next in terms of future releases there, just on the short term. So as far as important release information, there's a number of things that certain customers of the product will need to be aware of. So one of the things that we've done is we've updated our support for SQL Server, Microsoft's database, which means that we've had to update the JDBC driver. And Microsoft have introduced a number of breaking changes. Okay, in most cases, we don't see an impact, but we do encourage customers to review Microsoft's release notes in order to see what those breaking changes are and determine whether they impact you. We've got some notes on one that may impact some customers, although we'd be surprised if it does, with some mitigations there in terms of handling that. But that's something we encourage you to look at if that's the database of choice. Okay. So in terms of the bundled Python that we ship with the agent, we've upgraded that, and we've done testing of all of the supported integrations through the integration hub. But we do encourage customers to test any integrations that you have just to make sure, and particularly if you've got any custom integrations that you've done or integrations that you've sourced outside of the integration hub, okay, prior to moving the 7.6 agent into production. Okay. For IBM Z users, the ZOS side, non-restartable steps, we've added support for the JCLRD keyword. It means a change in behavior. We don't see an impact because that's really the way they should be treated, but steps marked NR and NC will now be marked as non-restartable. Okay. For the no longer supported, obviously with the upgrade of SQL Server, older versions of SQL Server, which are no longer supported by Microsoft, are dropping off our support radar. And similar with MySQL 5.7 as well on the database, just an older release that we want to take off our QA matrix there. And also for the agent Solaris 10, we're no longer able to support Solaris 10 from 7.6 onwards. Okay. If anybody has any issues with any of the drop support, reach out to me. We can certainly have a discussion and we can review these things. But in general, usually sometime after the vendor has stopped supporting them, we will drop support. It just lightens the load on our QA testing process to reduce the number of combinations of platforms that we have to test on. Okay. So in terms of the headlines, a whole bunch of things. These are really just the high-level items. As I said, there's a lot of little items in there. We'll cover some of those as we go through the demo and discussion. But we've added validation for the software download so that you can confirm that the package that you download is A, from us, and B, is not being corrupted in any way. A number of small performance improvements, and I'll go through some of those. Updates on the security side, as always. That's always an ongoing focus with the releases. Prevention of concurrent updates in the controller, and we'll talk about the strategy there, and we'll kind of show you how all that works. UC, the controller is now container ready. It's always been able to run in a container, but there's been a couple of things that we wanted to get round to improving its ability to properly operate in a container environment. And we'll kind of discuss a little bit some of the requirements around that. And at some point in the not too distant future, we will be publishing a supported image. But at the moment, you're able to create your own images for the container, and we can certainly help with that. Okay. The Python upgrade to 3.11, mentioned that already. The SQL Server 2022 support. We've continued with the modernization of the SAP task, which we had in the 7.5 release. So we'll look at some of the additional things there. And there are some techniques that we've put in that we will be utilizing, and some that have been utilized in other areas of the product as well. We've got a new universal event for SLA violations, so you can track notifications or actions in a new way. And quite a broad-reaching capability, the ability to launch or trigger a workflow from a specific starting point, or include specific jobs or combinations of both. And we'll look at that further in the demo. Okay. So for the software download validation from 7.6 onwards, all software downloads are going to be PGP signed. So the installation documentation for both UA and UC provide validation instructions, and also the link that I've got here to get hold of the public key that you'll need to do that validation. Okay. So on the performance side, a couple of things there is this will have significant impact for certain users, less impact for other users. But the rewrite locks issue is that if you launch or trigger the same workflow with a lot of different triggers and you do it at the same time, there was a little bit of a deadlock situation which we've resolved in the product, so that we don't have the ability. So we now have the ability for those effectively to be multi-threaded. Although that process was multi-threaded, the way the records were locked when the launch process was happening meant that if it was the same workflow definition that was being launched, in some cases dozens, hundreds, even thousands of times within a short period, if they would single stream. So that's been resolved. And also we've gone in and with the audit purge, if you have a lot of audit records, we've gone in and used the same technique that we use for the other purges, and they're basically purging it in chunks to improve the performance there. Okay. On the security side, with the communication between the agent's UAG and the controller, this will happen automatically. It's kind of our internal protocol. And the version 3 of it basically means that the controller is going to dynamically generate keys used for encryption. Okay, so it's a one-time key used for the encryption when that connection's made. Nothing you really have to do to take advantage of that. If the components available support it, it'll be used automatically. So in terms of preventing concurrent updates, and we'll go through and kind of show you how this works in the demo, there are really two ways of doing it. So this was one of the things that's been in the controller since it was built, since it was designed. Not generally a problem, but effectively you had the issue that potentially the last update wins if multiple people are updating the same record at the same time. Now, traditionally using the product with a central admin group, this was less of a problem. But as we're seeing more and more widespread use of what we term citizen automators in the product, different groups of users being able to do, various functions with automation, including creating and maintaining their own definitions, there's more and more of a risk of this being an issue. Okay, and there are two approaches to this: optimistic and pessimistic locking. We've chosen the optimistic locking route, and we'll kind of explain what that is in a second. The main reason for that is that the pessimistic locking really introduces some performance and scalability concerns that we were not comfortable with. So optimistic locking basically means that when we read the record, when you open the record for edit, you're going to be in a situation where we will capture the version number, or for records that aren't versioned, the updated time. stamp for that record and check that that hasn't changed before we write it back. Okay, disadvantage of that is that if someone else has updated it, you're kind of stuck. But it does stop you from doing that last update wins. Pessimistic locking means that we'd lock the record in the database if someone edits it, but there's all sorts of issues in terms of someone goes into edit, locks the record, goes to lunch, goes home, whatever. You've got that record locked in the database and all sorts of things that you have to worry about with that. So we decided that that was probably a little too heavyweight for what we wanted to achieve there. With the container readiness, the things that we've done is we fixed the logging situation with the controller. Now has the option to log the standard out, which is more container friendly. We don't want to have log files on the file system within a container. And also because containers transient in nature, we did this for the agent as well when we containerized the agent. When an agent registers with the cluster, you have the option to make it flagged as transient, which means that it will remove itself from the cluster when it shuts down, because potentially if you rebuild that container and restart it, you're going to come in and register as a different node, which you don't want to then have all these dead nodes that you need to clean up. So it's basically an automatic cleanup for those. Okay, there's a fully supported image coming soon. And we'll kind of discuss as we go through the presentation some of the use cases around why you might want to use a container. And I'm interested in feedback from the group as to whether you're excited about it, could care less, how you think you'd use it, and those kind of things in terms of that. So, which takes us on to the question. So we have a poll question. And what I'd like to get is some information as to, would you use a controller in a container and what would you use it for? Would you be interested in previewing and testing new releases in a container environment? Do you plan on having development environments, sandbox environments stood up in containers? Is it something you consider in production? Do you have other use cases that don't fit any of those, or you're not interested at all? So I'd very much appreciate you guys spending the time responding to the poll, and we'll give you a few seconds. There we go. Great. Okay, so the majority is around previewing and testing, development, sandbox. Interesting, 20% for production. That's a discussion I'd like to kind of get into, what the production use cases are. There are a few there, because traditionally monolithic applications like the controller don't well suit for containers, but great for testing. However, there are some use cases where I think that would see, and I'm also interested in the other use cases. So the people that checked other, reach out to me and let me know what those use cases are. That would be great. And kind of about the expected for people that really aren't interested at this point in the container side. So that's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so let's take a look and flip over to the controller here. So this is my 7.7 controller. I guess the first thing to go through is there's a change to the global search here. We've added the capability to search for a specific UUID. This came up in terms of some of the logging mentions UUIDs, and it's just a useful way of being able to go and say, hey, what definition is that? Some of them will mention both the record name and the UUID, so this just gives you that capability. If you have that UUID or SysID, as you'll see it referenced in the product, the unique ID for the definition or the instance or whatever it is, you'll be able to search for it and find it. So a useful little function there. Okay. So on the universal template side, we've added some additional capabilities to some of the fields here. Specifically, we've added the capability to have regular expression validation for text fields. So for example here, I've got one that will validate email address format. Okay, so you see in my hint, I've got, at whatever. So you can do things like that and provide validation for these fields. I've got another one that I've set up with phone number validation. And also for the credential fields, we have set up the ability for those to automatically take a variable in the same way that standard tasks do. Now, for the other reference fields like scripts and connections, they will come. We took this release and picked the credential field in order to have a shot at getting that prototyped. There it is. So if we open those tasks, here you can just kind of see what these fields look like. So we'll just pop it in with the validation. So for the credential field, now you'll see it has the credential variable checkbox, the same as the utility credential does. So it behaves in the same way. So now, rather than when you design these having to use additional Boolean and text fields to capture that information, it's done automatically with the field type for you. So you can then type a variable in there and have a variable resolved. So for example, with these, if I put in, and this is a US format, the 10-digit, if I put in something invalid and go ahead and try and save that record, he said, there we go, I get US format does not match the regex pattern. So it gives you the pattern and tells you that it doesn't match in that case. Same with the email address. So you can put validations on those fields now, which I think will be very useful enhancement for a lot of things. Okay, so close that out. Yes. And close that guy. So the other thing we've done, and this is also relevant to the universal extensions, universal tasks, but also other capabilities here, is the lookup fields. It's just a small little change here in terms of the lookup fields. Now when I go and do a lookup for a field, submit that, you'll see there's a little bit of animation there, which just shows you it's working. So if you have a lookup, depending on what you've done and how you do that, that takes a little bit of time, at least you can see it's still working. Small little change, but a nice usability feature there. Okay, which kind of takes us on to the SAP task. What we see here is actually this field has been added as a dynamic lookup field, which it wasn't before. So again, we're getting the information of available target servers from the SAP system itself. And we've also then taken some other things in terms of the job steps that we added. In there is we added support for the other types of job steps that there are. ABAP program was the one that we introduced in the last release. You can now add the external program and the external command, okay, in terms of adding those. And for the ABAP program, we've added the print parameters and expanded the selection there in terms of making the format a lookup field, dynamic lookup field, and also added output content, cover sheet, spool request, output options there. So a whole bunch of stuff there to make that more synergist with the way that you expect those fields, that information to be available within the SAP system. So a little more friendly for your SAP business users that are used to the SAP interface in terms of seeing the same information in a similar way. Okay, and that's all through the enhanced SAP form. We still have the legacy form, which basically maps all the functionality that we have in the connector, but the enhanced form there gives you that more user-friendly experience there. Okay. So moving on to workflows. Okay, that's curious. I'm not seeing everything I'm expecting to. It's because I'm on webhooks, not workflows. That makes sense. Give it a second to. There we go. Switch over. First thing we notice is a small tweak to the UI. If you're using dark mode like I am today, when you open the workflow, because it had previously had a white background, it could be a bit of a shock. So we've just darkened the background to make that a little more friendly from that perspective. And also what you would find is that clicking save when you were in edit previously would just save the record, whether you'd made changes or not. The downside of that was it created a new version. So if you had users who would just click the save button, it meant that you would create basically useless versions that had no changes in them. So we prevented that from happening in terms of that. And you get a little pop-up in the console saying, hey, oops, I clicked no parent workflows. Let's click on the save, not the parent workflow. There we go. No changes detected from that side. So then the other things we've introduced in here is the ability, if we look at this workflow, and you kind of remember what it looks like, but we'll come back to it. And this is from workflow launch with variables and trigger now. If the trigger has a single workflow in it, right? We don't really know what to do if you've got multiple workflows, but you'll see a new dialog button pop up here in that dialog, and it's the vertex selection. So basically what we want to do is we want to start this, launch this workflow, but not run all the jobs. I want to start it from a certain point and also run another task. Now, all the tasks in here are called the same thing. So I'm going to have to go by specific vertex ID. And vertex 11 is the one I want, but I also want to run, let me re-edit that because I want to make that a root job. What root job means is it'll run from that point onwards. Okay, if I didn't check root job, it would just say that task is selected to be in the workflow. None of its dependencies are taken into account. Okay, and if we select the same task but a different vertex, in this case, I think number 5, and just to run that so that we show both sides of that, and then go ahead and launch this workflow. And we'll go to instances for that workflow once I check it. And we'll look at the active instance and compare that to the definition. Okay. So what you'll see here is that it's selected from that point onwards. There's obviously an error with the way I've got these tasks set up. That's fine. And the other tasks there that we have now. Thing to bear in mind with this is that if any root task or individual vertex that you select that has actions, those actions will not, those run skip criteria, that will not be processed. We're assuming that if you select it, you want to run it. Now, run skip criteria for anything beyond that point, yes, will get processed in the normal manner because you may be passing things between them to decide what runs and so on and so forth. But the root job or an individual hanging vertex there will run regardless if you select it in this manner. Okay. Any sub-workflows that are in this flow will be included in their entirety. Okay, so at this point, this is just a one-level thing where we can go to a workflow and say, hey, I want to launch it from this point, I want to start it from this point, and potentially pass in whatever variables we need for that as well. Okay. All right, let's close the monitor down. Now, what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to open a private window, log into the session. That's going to allow me to edit this workflow. Yep, one, sorry, I wanted prod. I'm not doing on test. There we go. And we'll show you how the optimistic locking works to give you an idea of that. And that's basically available for all definitions. Now, you will potentially run into an issue, and there is a property available to switch that off for agents. And we don't anticipate that people update agents very often, but agent records get updated every time there's a heartbeat. So if you edit an agent record, there is a good chance that that record has changed since you started editing it, okay, since you opened the record. So that's something that just may get annoying, and that can be disabled for those. It's just kind of a special case there that you have. So we'll go into workflows and we'll open our complex workflow. Let's just edit it. That's easier than that. And I'll just make a small change, save that change, okay? Come back to the other version here, go back into my workflow editor. Okay, we'll go in and we'll add a new task to this. And we'll just throw a new timer task in there. We'll go ahead and join it. Now, previously, what would have happened is if I click save here, this would overwrite the change made on the other system. Okay. Now, with the optimistic locking in there, it shows that we've detected there were modifications made. What do you want to do? Okay. So I can force the change. I can cancel out, or and then decide what to do, or I can cancel and close the record, discard my changes. And I actually just want to discard. I don't want to make those changes there. So we'll head there. So that's an example of how the optimistic locking there works within the tool, but it prevents that last update win situation. Okay, we've also added a new universal event, and these will come, every release or so. There's a lot of events we want to put in there. We made some changes to some of the existing events. For example, UUIDs has been added for the agent, or that might have been the previous release. For the task status changed, we added the critical flag to that, but also we've added the task SLA. So every time a task exceeds this, fails to meet its SLA conditions, this event will be fired. And you can use that in combination with the webhooks to do things like notifications or kickoff, access another product like a service management tool, or kick off a workflow or a task. Now, one of the things you'll see, and we get asked this question every now and again, well, hey, this launches a task. Well, that's a notification. I just want to send an email to say that I'm late. And if I use this, it launches a task, right? The reason we do that is for visibility. So the idea is that, if you're using the notifications where we just do a notification email, that kind of happens in the background. You don't have visibility. Yes, there are administrative emails and get set if those notification tasks fail for whatever reason. But if we launch a task, say you launch an email task or a web service task to do that integration, you've got complete visibility on whether that action has failed or worked within the dashboard, within the activity. And for all the tasks that are generated from the webhooks here, they are not part of the license if you're on the usage-based licensing. So you're not paying for it, but you get the advantage of having the extra visibility there in terms of that. So that's just kind of a architectural decision that we made, and we feel it's much better to have that visibility. We exclude those from the licensing counts when you're counting the number of monthly tasks that you're running and so on, because it's not part of your production workflow. These are intended to be used for things like integrations to your problem ticket management system or notification emails, whether you're sending messages to a Slack channel or something like that. That task, we don't pay for. And also, in terms of the webhook stuff, and we talked about this before, you can also just generate a URL. If somebody is, the endpoint is set up to take a webhook, an inbound webhook, great. If not, you've got complete flexibility as you can launch a task or a workflow to do really whatever you need to with that notification there. Okay, and last on my list of things to look at is a change around the way the security permissions work. So we've run into a situation which has some limitations in the product in the past where, an admin may want to give a user or group access to records and basically assign them to everybody except. In terms of, hey, everyone can have access to this except for a few different business services. And there's some limitations that they've run into in terms of doing that. And if we look at the permission records, and we just go ahead and create a new one, in terms of that, if you're putting in specific business services, you have a limit to the number of business services that you can specify. And the reason for that limit is that it's largely created by some of the backend databases we use, but not all of them. So there are limits that we're hitting in some of those backend databases that preclude us from extending that field to an unlimited number. Plus, there are some performance considerations around having very complex mapping in terms of doing that. So we kind of taken the other approach. So now you can say, hey, we can basically exclude access by saying, hey, if you're not, we can grant you read access if you're not a member, or we can restrict you if you're not a member of, these two, three groups or whatever it is. So it gives you some additional flexibility there. So you'll see that business service criteria menu has been extended. Okay. Now, one thing to be careful, and this is an issue or not an issue, the way permissions work in any case, is you kind of have to be careful of how the permissions are aggregated, right? So if you're granting this access in another way, in other words, you're specifically mentioning this business service and giving it access via another permission, he will have that access. Okay. So it's not a way of kind of saying, hey, you're giving, out and then specifically giving it to him and then specifically taking away cancels out. It doesn't work that way. But that's not really a change in behavior in terms of that, but just something to point out as you get into looking at utilizing that feature and maybe testing that. Okay. All right. Okay. So as mentioned before, I encourage everyone to go to the documentation. Okay. And under the support and maintenance list, you'll see that we have the maintenance list and the release information. So the release notes are high level, cover a lot of the features, but not all of them, and provide some information about, what we've done, potentially why we've done that. And also then the maintenance list, which is a complete list of all of the new features, defects that are fixed in the product there, for both the agent and controller. So again, before looking at an upgrade, and certainly before looking at rolling something into production, highly recommend that those get reviewed. So what comes next? So we've already started our next project. As I mentioned, we do 2 releases a year. And the planning cycle kind of overlaps. So we'd already planned what we were going to do next before we delivered this release, and we're already starting to plan the release after the next one that you'll see. But there are a number of things that just kind of give you an idea, and this is not a guarantee by any means, because things change in the software world. But we're looking at a number of new dependency options for workflows, so you'll start to see some of those come out. We're looking at a new interface for the product geared towards line of business users that need to do things like submit their own jobs with parameters, or maybe review schedules that run regularly, look at output, potentially even some operational activities, such as doing rerun and canceling for those things, but more of an interface geared towards that more casual automation user, rather than the admin interface that you guys are used to today, which has all of the different permutations and options of the powerful flexibility we have in the tool available, but are not necessarily relevant to the more casual user who says, I need to run this report, or I just want to schedule this report to run next week, or I want to review when my financial closing is going to happen, those kind of activities that we can do, right? We're also working on a replacement for our messaging bus, the OMS. Now, I've written longer term next to that because that will not be delivered in the next release, but work is ongoing. We actually started work on that a couple of releases ago. It's a big project with far-reaching consequences, and a lot of testing is going to have to happen. And we will support the existing message bus for some time to come, but we're going to introduce a new one. Definitely not in the next release, but potentially in the release after that. So you'll start to see that. That'll give customers time to acclimatize to it, run some testing, and so on. And it'll have some advantages over what we currently do in terms of that. Kind of the history or the story behind that is that when we introduced the OMS, we looked at the message bus market for what was commercially and open source available, and we didn't find all the features that we needed. So we developed it. And I think it's a great piece of technology, but there are things that we need to add to it in terms of functionality and flexibility and throughput and so on that, have driven us to say, well, if we're going to invest a lot of time and effort into our message bus, the message bus market has moved along very significantly. So we reviewed the market and we've looked at what's available, and we've made some decisions about what we want to integrate and implement. So we're using, an open source product there. And that's going to replace that, and it provides some additional things in terms of the way the high availability works and some other things that really we're kind of quite happy with in terms of how it's going to help improve the way the experience of the product and the functionality there. Okay. Little thing that we need to do, and we're going to do quickly, is that this is kind of a historical thing. So UAG, the component of the agent that runs workload on behalf of the controller, reports back its own version. So each component of the agent has a different version, and they're not necessarily the same. They all start off when we do a release at 7.6.0.0. But if we push maintenance out, we may update UDM and ucommand, but we may not update UAG. So UAG's version number doesn't change, which means that you've got a package version of 7.6.0.1, but the controller shows 7.6.0.0. Okay, so we see that as a problem. So there's a couple of things we're going to do there. One is we're going to get it to report back the package version, and also then actually, probably not initially, but further down the line, have a way for it to view all of the different component versions as well, which also will help us from a support point of view. Is that we do occasionally get problems where an upgrade was some problem with an upgrade and the procedure that was used to upgrade an agent, and we get versions that are out of whack for the different components. So we can take care of that as well, or identifying that more quickly. Some new authentication options for the various agent options in terms of how they authenticate with the different operating system components. So UAG, ucommand, UDM are the major ones. There are others out there that will see that implemented. So that is something else that's coming. I know a number of customers are keen to upgrade their IBM Z environments to the 3.1 version. We should have validation within the next couple of months for that. That's not release dependent, assuming we don't hit any code changes required to support that. Not expected from the initial reviews that have been done. Validation is in progress. So those of you who are waiting for that, we should have that as soon as possible. We're looking at, on the Z platform, monitoring a number of different things outside of what we do. External Job Monitor is one of them. So we're working towards capabilities there. And again, we're working on a new updated agent for the IBM I platform as well. That's, again, longer term. You may see some components of that or some pieces of that in the 7.7, but we're not guaranteeing that at this point. But full functionality, and there's a long list of things that we want to do with that, will come over several releases. And I know there are a number of customers on the security side that are interested in us integrating with HashiCorp as a third-party secrets provider. So that's going to be rolled out. I've also heard of another one, name escapes me right now, that's come up a couple of times. We're reviewing that. We basically want to support as many third-party secrets providers as possible. So if you're using ones that we don't currently support, and we support the CyberArk, and we support the AWS and the Azure stuff, if there are others out there, let us know. We'll add them to the list of ones that we want to get to. And we're also busy looking at validating Oracle's 23C latest database, which isn't quite GA yet, but we've put it in that project because it should go GA when it's in that, during the life cycle of that project. Okay. So this turns us on to questions and hopefully some answers.
Yes, thanks, Colin, and great presentation. I will jump in with some of these questions. I think first we have some people who are watching along who are sharing where they're watching along with, and I think that's really fun. So we've got some folks from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, Emily. We also have some people calling in from Byron, Michigan, and then we have some international folks from Denmark. So I just wanted to share that I'm at our Stonebranch office in Atlanta, and Colin, maybe you can share with everybody where you're calling in from.
I'm on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi.
Awesome. Very cool. So we're not too far apart, and we have a lot of diversity on this call and where people are calling in from. So awesome. Exciting stuff. Okay, so let's jump into some technical questions. I think the first one we have for you is, how should I get started with UC in a container?
So what we can do is provide, I'm still working on, we'll provide a documentation page, but reach out to me if you really want to do that, because I have the notes for it. We're just tidying them up with instructions on how to do that. Basically everything you'll need to make that happen. As I say, we need to provide effectively a private repository to make that available. Unlike the agent, there are some concerns about putting that code on sort of public access, as we did with the agent, because it's not, strictly speaking, compiled code, right? So we're working towards that. But in the meantime, I can give you everything you need to create your own agents there in terms of that for pretty much whatever platform you want, right? I've got some examples for a couple of specific platforms, but we should be able to help in any case. And I have worked with a prospective customer recently who's got that up and running, so we know that all works in environments other than mine.
Perfect. Thanks, Colin. So short answer is if you get in touch with us at Stonebranch, we will make sure to get you all the resources to get you set up and running. We now have a bunch of other people who are chiming in, so I'll just name a few other places where I'm seeing people call in from. This is really exciting. We've got some folks in Indonesia, it looks like. We've got somebody from Columbus, Ohio, France, Deerfield Beach, Florida, Germany, India, Vermont. So thank you guys for all being on the call with us today. I know we have a few different time zones represented here. I'm seeing Philippines, South Africa. Super exciting. Thank you guys. Minneapolis. Let's go on to our next technical question. So will UC in container run in Red Hat's OpenShift?
Yes. So that's an interesting kind of story behind that. So I've been using UC in containers forever, and I just used the Tomcat image that Apache publishes as a basis for it. But internally, I know we have a lot of customers that run Red Hat, and the issue there is that, in general, people that run Red Hat want to use, and certainly if we want to get certified on the Red Hat system, we have to use the Red Hat images, and specific UBI9, which we use for the agents there. Okay. Now, Red Hat doesn't provide an image that contains Tomcat, but we basically are able to create an image from that base image, install Tomcat, and do that. So the install steps or the setup steps are a little different, but yes, absolutely, it's doable. And we've done it. We certainly have. And when we go with the public images, we'll provide both. And potentially others if we run into other requirements, right? So
awesome. Thank you for that answer.
Yes is the short answer.
Yes, and we will make it happen and get in touch with us and we can show you how to do it. Okay, next question for you, Colin. Can multiple SAP job steps be added to one task, or one job step equals one task?
So, and I'm not the SAP expert, but as I understand the question, the answer is yes. However, there's not so much a caveat, but something to be aware of. So I think if we go back to the controller screen, which is this one, and I closed down my SAP window. Oh, yeah, okay. Don't want to save those changes. I didn't keep it open. So my left-hand menu, it's going to be easier to navigate there. I had it closed just to give me a bit more screen real estate. But if we go to integrations and the SAP tasks, with the enhanced form, which we talked about earlier, which is the one that's got all the changes in it, you have the ability to add job steps, right? So we kind of looked at the different support, so whether that's ABAP steps or whatever. So here on the job steps, so yes, you can. In terms of that, but that's for the enhanced one. And that was originally introduced in the 7.5 release. The 7.6 release extends the things that we can do. So here we see we've got multiple job steps. Okay. Now, as far as I am aware, we cannot currently do a rerun at the step level. That is something we're looking at, but that's something to be aware of. And it may be that if you have within a workflow, if you keep it to one SAP job per job step, then from a restartability point of view, at least as now, that's potentially the better way to go. It depends on your requirements. So that's kind of the only thing I'll say there. And we've probably exceeded my knowledge of SAP at this point. However, if you want to have a follow-up discussion, we've got plenty of SAP experts in-house that can talk more knowledgeably than I can on SAP.
Awesome. Yep. So let us know if you are working specifically with SAP, and we can put you in touch with the experts who can make sure that we're answering your questions correctly. Next question for you, Colin, is do we plan to support more databases?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I laugh out loud? My apologies. Not if we can help it. So I know that there's one in particular that seems to come up, and we are considering it. I'm not even going to mention which one it is. We would prefer not to, and the reason is that we already have issues where the different databases we support have different capabilities, and that restricts what we can do. Also, from a testing point of view, if we add a database, it adds complexity to our testing matrix. And we already make a very significant investment in QA effort. We do our very best to test every combination of different versions, different platforms, and everything else out there. And although a lot of this stuff is automated, even some of the automated tests run for a long time. So if you have specific ones that you want, drop me a note. We'll see where that is. But my preference would be not to do that, because there are other things I'd rather spend the development resources on in the product. However, if that's what the market demands, obviously, we're not going to stand in the way of that. But the answer is I'd rather not.
Right. So you just have to wait around and see and stick with us. And if we cross that bridge, we'll get to it. Cool. Next question for you, Colin. Will the ability to update the due out time on a failed task instance be coming?
Due out time, failed task instance. Good question. The due out time. Okay, so this is because you're using a terminology I don't think we use in the product, but I think I know what you mean, and I think we've discussed that. And yes, but I can't put my finger on when exactly. So this is related to when you rerun a task, is being able to reset the service level for it, right? Hopefully, that's one I know we're looking at, and even the right terminology is escaping me, and I can't put my finger on what we decided for a timeline for that one. Lots of different things.
Okay. So if you are the person
Well,
in the audience,
I'm making a note of it, and I'll confirm that that's what I think it is.
Cool. So if you're the person who asked that question, we will reach out to you and follow up on that question and ask for a little bit of clarification. So we have 5 minutes left. Colin, I have one more question for you that I'm seeing. This question is, any testing with UC on RHEL 9? We are on CentOS 7 going to RHEL 9.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, so in fact, that's one of the container environments I have is the UEL 9, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. And we use that in house as well. So yes, we're perfectly fine on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. Not a problem.
Super. And thanks to our audience. I see you guys are keeping the questions coming here. We just got one kind of last minute question come in. And this question is, how is the critical flag going to work? Will we be able to indicate some tasks are critical?
Okay, so this is a big topic, but we'll try and answer it quickly. Okay, so what the critical flag means is that if you're using the critical pathing, okay, if a task is on the critical path, that's the critical flag. However, the way the critical path works is you kind of have two options. You can let us calculate it, which means that we basically just calculate the longest path or paths through a workflow and decide what that is, or you can specify what the endpoints are. In other words, which jobs are critical. Okay, and that's different to the critical flag that has its own different flag, and I forget what that flag's called, but there is a flag for that. That's not the one I mentioned when I mentioned the SLA. It's whether it's on the critical path or not. So the answer to your question is yes. You can indicate whether a job is critical, and then the critical path is calculated to that point, and you can see it all based on that. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't have time to demo that right now, which would probably be the way to make that make sense.
No, that was great. Thank you for walking us through that logic, Colin. And thank you, everybody who has joined us today. I have one more question that I just saw on the call that I think is more directed towards me and my team, and that's, will these slides be available after the event? And that
Oh,
is 100%
definitely not.
true.
No. Yes, of
No?
course they will.
Yes. Exactly. So we will be reaching out after the event with the slides and also a post-event recording. So just look towards your email after this event and we'll send those right over to you. And wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Colin, for the great presentation. In the pop-up on your screen, you should find a link to take our short event survey. We would really appreciate it if you would let us know what you thought of this webinar today. It should take you just a couple minutes. That way we can continue to improve on our Stonebranch webinars. Like I said, later today, you'll get that email that has a link to the recording of this event, as well as those slides, so you can rewatch and share with your entire team. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us. Don't forget to visit stonebranch.com to find additional resources and information about our upcoming events. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Colin. And we'll see you guys at our next session.
Bye, everyone.